Two countries, armed with enough nuclear weapons to destroy the planet, stood face to face for over 40 years. Everyone expected a war. It never came. Why? Because this wasn't a normal war. This was fear, calculated. After World War II, the world split into two sides: the United States and the Soviet Union. Two superpowers, two ideologies, both convinced the other had to be stopped. No direct fighting, no invasion, just silence. And weapons, lots of them. But here's what most people don't understand. They could have gone to war multiple times. There were moments when one wrong move, one miscalculation, would have triggered everything. Missiles were ready, bombers were prepared, submarines were already underwater, waiting. Soldiers trained for a war they hoped would never start, because if it did, there would be no winners. So why didn't anyone press the button? Because both sides understood one thing: if they attacked first, they would be destroyed next. This was called mutually assured destruction. Not strategy, not bravery, just fear. Pure, calculated fear. Imagine knowing this. The moment you win is the same moment you lose everything. That's what kept the world frozen. So instead of fighting directly, they fought indirectly. Proxy wars, spies, propaganda, each side testing the other, without crossing the line. Because crossing that line meant the Yendi. But something started to change. Not outside. Inside the Soviet Union itself. The pressure wasn't just coming from enemies anymore. It was coming from within. Economic strain, political cracks, a system slowly weakening, while still pretending to be strong. From the outside, it looked like balance. Inside, it was already breaking. The war didn't happen, not because the tension disappeared, but because one side started collapsing before it could explode. And when that collapse began, it didn't look like war. It looked like silence. No missiles were launched. No final battle was fought. One side just stopped holding its weight, and the world shifted without a single explosion. The Cold War didn't end with a war. It ended with a mistake. Not a single explosion, not a final battle, just decisions that slowly broke a superpower. From the outside, the Soviet Union still looked strong. It had weapons. It had control. It had fear on its side. But inside, something was going wrong. The system was under pressure, not from enemies, but from itself. The economy was slowing down. Production was falling. Money was being poured into the military, while ordinary people had less and less. Food shortages, long lines, empty shelves, a superpower that couldn't feed its own people. But instead of stopping, the system kept going, because admitting weakness was not an option. Then came a decision. A leader who believed the system could be fixed, not destroyed. His name was Mikhail Gorbachev. He introduced reforms, changes meant to save the system. More openness, less control, a chance for people to speak. It sounded like a solution, but it did something else. It exposed everything that was broken. People started to see the truth, the corruption, the failure, the cracks that had been hidden for years. And once people see the truth, you can't force them to see it. The system began to lose control, not overnight, but slowly. Countries under its influence started pulling away. Voices grew louder. Protests became normal. Fear was no longer working. And that was the real problem. Because fear was the only thing holding everything together. Without it, the structure started to fall apart. Leaders tried to hold on, tried to regain control, but it was too late. The mistake wasn't just the reforms. The mistake was thinking the system could be opened without it collapsing. Because once pressure is released, everything inside comes out. And what came out couldn't be controlled. The superpower didn't explode. It unraveled, piece by piece. Control slipping, authority fading, until the question was no longer, can it be saved? But how long until it ends? And when that moment finally came, it didn't look like war. It looked like something much quieter, something final, something that would change the world, without a single bullet. On December 25th, 1991, something happened that most people today still don't fully understand. A superpower didn't weaken, it didn't surrender, it didn't lose a final war. It simply disappeared. The Soviet Union, one of the most powerful nations on Earth, officially ceased to exist. For decades, it had stood as an equal to the United States, shaping global politics, controlling vast territories, and influencing millions of lives. It was a pillar of the Cold War, a system where two superpowers held the world in a constant state of tension. And then it was over. There was no dramatic final battle, no invasion, no moment where one side stood victorious over the other. Instead, it ended quietly. A flag was lowered. A statement was made. And just like that, the structure that had defined global power for decades was gone. But the real story wasn't the announcement. It was what happened immediately after. Millions of people woke up the next day in a reality that no longer made sense. One day, they were citizens of a global superpower. The next day, that country no longer existed. Imagine that shift, not over years, not gradually, but almost overnight. Systems people depended on collapsed instantly. Governments lost control. Institutions that once felt permanent suddenly became irrelevant. For ordinary people, this wasn't about politics or ideology. It was about survival. Savings that had been built over years became worthless almost overnight due to economic collapse and inflation. Jobs disappeared as industries broke down. Supply chains failed, and basic goods became harder to access. Soldiers who once served a powerful state were left uncertain about their roles, their loyalty, and even their future. Authority itself became unclear. What made it more unsettling was this: there was no clear enemy to blame. No war had destroyed the system. No foreign power had invaded and taken control. Instead, it felt like the entire structure had simply given up under its own weight. For decades, the world had been structured around one central idea: balance. Two superpowers, constantly opposing each other, preventing either side from becoming too dominant. This system was known as bipolarity. It wasn't peaceful, but it was stable in a strange way. Each side acted as a restraint on the other. Every decision was calculated, every move measured, because the consequences of escalation were too severe. When the Soviet Union collapsed, that balance disappeared instantly. And for the first time in decades, only one global power remained. The United States stood alone at the top, without a direct rival to challenge its influence. This marked the beginning of a new global structure, a unipolar world. At first glance, this might seem like a moment of stability, even relief. The long-standing tension of the Cold War was finally over. The threat of a massive global confrontation had faded. But what replaced it was not as simple as peace. Because when power is no longer balanced, it begins to shift in unpredictable ways. Without a competing superpower to act as a counterweight, global influence started to concentrate. Decisions that once required caution and restraint could now be made with less opposition. But instead of creating order, this often created new forms of instability. Conflicts didn't disappear, they changed shape. Instead of large-scale global standoffs, the world began to see smaller, regional conflicts. Tensions emerged in different parts of the world, driven by power vacuums, political uncertainty, and unresolved issues that had been suppressed during the Cold War. In many places, the absence of a balancing force created more unpredictability, not less. The world had lost something it didn't fully appreciate at the time: not peace, but structure. That structure had been built on fear, on tension, on the constant awareness that any mistake could lead to catastrophic consequences. It was not a perfect system, but it imposed limits. It forced caution. It created a kind of order within chaos. When that system collapsed, those limits disappeared, and what replaced it was something far less defined. Power continued to shift. New players began to emerge. Old alliances were questioned. The global system became more fluid, more complex, and in many ways, more difficult to control. The clear lines that once divided the world became blurred, and that uncertainty still exists today. The end of the Cold War was not a clean ending. It was a transition, one that reshaped global power without a single decisive moment of victory or defeat. It showed that systems don't always collapse with explosions or dramatic finales. Sometimes, they end quietly, leaving behind consequences that unfold slowly over time. The war everyone feared never happened, but the world that came after was not as stable as many expected. Because when a balance built on fear disappears, what replaces it is not always peace. Sometimes, it's something far more uncertain.